Gracias. Muy bien, pues muchas gracias, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta sesión número 10 del Seminario Ilnamiqui. Estamos muy contentos, contentas, agradecidos por tener esta sesión, por fin con la que iniciamos hace un año el seminario con la intención de reunir a diferentes profesionales del estudio de la memoria, las materialidades y los archivos. Y bueno, hoy estamos muy contentos de participar porque estamos en una sesión especial que hemos coordinado con la International Communication Association, la ICA, con la que hemos estado trabajando desde la primera sesión que estuvo invitado el doctor Carlos Escolari, que nos acompañará hoy moderando esta sesión, coordinando esta sesión y que hemos venido trabajando también con las ponentes que hoy tenemos. Les avisamos que estaremos haciendo esta transmisión en el idioma inglés y que se pueden activar los subtítulos y la traducción en nuestro canal de YouTube, donde ya estamos transmitiendo en vivo. Pues muy agradecida, les voy a dejar la palabra y quiero hacer un reconocimiento a las personas que han estado acompañando el seminario desde el inicio en julio del 2025 y pues agradecer a las ponentes del día de hoy. Thank you very much for your participation, Annie, Ruth, Débora Barcelá, Ángeles Donoso y por supuesto, Dr. Carlos Escolari. It's honor that you were here. Thank you very much. Adelante, doctor Carlos, le dejo las palabras y empezamos esta sesión número 10 de cierre de la temporada del Seminario Ilnamiqui. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Susana. Thank you. Well, Susana and Jerónimo, he will be joining us in a few minutes. For the Communication History Division of ICA, it's very important one of the objectives of the division was to expand the theoretical and academic conversations to go beyond the classic circuits. So in this logic, in the last 2 years, we have tried to support activities, seminars, conversation, conferences in different parts of the world. Last year, we have with the University of Lima, Universidad de Lima in Peru, they were organizing a conference about the history of radio. So we also participated as ACA in that conference with a couple of speakers and supporting the initiative. And in this case, well, when I proposed Susana and Jerónimo to create this collaboration between ACA and the seminar, they say, okay, fantastic. So we decided to close this year, this course with seminar number 10, with this special edition with a couple of colleagues that I'm going to introduce right now. So thank you very much also for the people from the UAM, Xochimilco, in Mexico City, and all the colleagues. I see people from Spain, from the USA here in the participants of this Zoom meeting. And also we have people on YouTube. So thank you very much. So our first speaker today is Débora Barcelá. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Media and Journalism and coordinator of the Bachelor in Communication at the Università della Svizzera Italiana in Switzerland. Her research focuses on the history of the web with particular attention to its promotion within and outside European Laboratory of Particle Physics, the CERN, the place in Switzerland, where the web was born in 1990. She's currently involved in a project called Once Upon a Time in the Web, which disseminates the history of the web through public engagement activities. But Deborah participates in the team coordinated by our dear colleague Gabriele Balbi. He's been the president of our division for the last 2 years. So Deborah, welcome to this seminar, and the digital floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and also thanks to Geronimo and Susana for the invitation. I'm so happy to be with you today. And maybe I should also say that I was the former student and early career representative of the ICA Communication History Division. So it's such a great pleasure. And when Carlos and all the other colleagues invited us, they explained that they were wanted from us to explain a personal experience with archival materials, memory, and materiality. So what I've done so far is to have a recollection of what I did during my PhD research and try to provide you with really my personal experience with archival materials. And the topic of the seminar is about the role of media in shaping and preserving collective memory. And actually my PhD research was about the World Wide Web. So this is a medium that normally impact and shape how the memory is preserved and collected. But right now, today, I really would like to show you how the memory of the web was preserved through the years. So I will just provide you a brief introduction of the research that I've gone through during my research so that you can have a basic understanding of what I do. And then I will provide you with practical example. So I'm not sure. Okay. So my PhD research was about the history of the web. So with the web, I'm not meaning the internet, which is the physical infrastructural network, but we focus on the World Wide Web. So it is one of the main services that you can find on the internet. And we focus on the early years of this medium from 1989 to 1995. And this research was made possible through the fundings of the Smith's National Science Foundation. And what we did is to have an historical research through archival material at CERN. So CERN, for those maybe who don't know what it is, it's the European Organization for Nuclear Research. And actually, it is the birthplace of the web. And it is situated in Switzerland. So maybe this is the reason why I'm right now in Università della Svizzera Italiana, so in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. And the broad main goal of this research project was to understand how the web was conceptualized, promoted, and described during its early stages. And as Carlos said, it was run by Professor Gabriele Balbi, who is my supervisor. So why this project was important for us? Since the collective memory about the origin of the web till some years ago was really dominated by simplified stories. And with simplified stories, I mean that there was a set of stabilized narratives behind its history. And these narratives were really connected to four main categories that I try to summarize in the slides. And first of all, there was this idea that the web was invented by a lone inventor. So there was the figure of Tim Berners-Lee, who was seen the sole and single genius who developed the web. Then there was this idea in the memory of people that the web was totally conceived as an altruistic gift, so that the people that were working on the web wanted to provide the web for free to the public domain for humans, just because of something a very idealistic sensation. Then there was also this kind of interpretation that the web had an inevitable success. So that's since the beginning of its development, the web was successful. And this idea was also portrayed by the primary sources written by the so-called founding fathers of the web. So they wrote two main books, Tim Berners-Lee himself, and the title of this book was The Ultimate Destiny of the Web, so that in his understanding, the web has to be a very idealistic place in the history of humanity. And then there was also this common idea and memory that the web is equal to the internet. And I'm sure that also you, but also I, sometimes call the web the internet and the internet the web, as they were like the very same idea. And this portrays the idea that the web was something that was developed at its origin in the United States, while actually we will see that it is not like this. So basically, my supervisor wanted to go beyond these simplified narratives and to provide a research that could challenge these myths surrounding the web. So what he did is to go to CERN, so the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and ask the Director General, that at the time in 2019 was Fabiola Gianotti, and ask if we could access the archive at CERN. And after many negotiations, my supervisor managed to have the access, but it was a very negotiation because till that year, so till 2019, the archives of the web was closed because in Switzerland and in some organization, there is this 30 years rule. So archival materials sometimes are closed till like you reach like the 30 years. So it was totally closed, and we were one of the research group that was granted the access to these archival materials. And what was striking is also the fact that this archival material at CERN is totally paper-based, okay? So you need to think that maybe when you think about the history of the web, you might think about something that is not material, so something that is digital. But actually, when we went to CERN, everything was paper-based. And here on the right, I put some example of the sources that we found in the archive, like printed emails, internal memos, technical proposal brochure, letter and faxes, and cardboard boxes. And a paradox is that there was sources that basically were at the digital origin, like printed emails, newsletters, and website, but in the archive that were not digital, they were on a paper base. And this is like very paradoxical if we think about that we are trying to understand the history of a digital medium. So basically everything was paper-based, nothing was digitized apart from two sources. So I really spent almost 2 weeks try to digitize these sources, but just with my iPad and with my mobile phone, just taking pictures. Because otherwise, the only thing is that if you want to have access to these sources, if we didn't took the picture, we needed always to go to Geneva. And from Lugano, where I am based, it's 6 hours by train. So we really need to do something. And basically, these paper-based materials had a length of 5 linear meters. So it was a lot. But what happened that when I started my PhD, it was October 2020. So, you know, there was COVID. And so basically, the first year of my research was like just, I could not go to CERN, CERN was closed. And so like my historical research was some kind of stop. I had also just few materials that my supervisor tried to pictures before the beginning of my PhD, but then because of this materiality of the archive, I need to wait a lot before going to CERN. But luckily, in November 2021, COVID was still there, but CERN opened its doors, and so we went to CERN. But actually, before going down to the archive, actually, I would say that CERN itself, its building, it's a place of memory. Because also, when we arrived to CERN, we were welcomed by James Wigan, who is one of the archivists there. And he showed us this golden plaque that you can see on the slide. And actually, this plaque is placed in the building number 1 of CERN. And basically, it said that in that exact place, the web was born. But then, speaking with other people, they said that actually this is not very the true story, because actually the web was started to be developed not just in building 1 of Sobre, but also in building 31, in building 513. So actually also like something, takeaways from this is that sometimes we try to fix some memory regarding the origin of a medium, try to construct what we can call like a ritualistic place, but actually this is something that is going to influence the memory, and maybe it is not something true. And in experience too, after coming to Sobre, we went down to the archive, and actually we also discovered that this archival material was not promoted and incentivized by the organization, also because CERN is not really focused on network infrastructure, but they focus on high energy physics. So this archival material and this collection was constructed by individual people who work at the development of the web. And so the collection has 99 folders, but actually 65 of them were folders that were brought by Robert Kallio, who is just one of the people that were working at the web project during that day. So we started to really understand that even the information that we would have found inside the archive was like some kind of limited. So even if it was a huge archive with 5 linear meters of documents, the information that we were finding there were not enough to really challenge all the myths that we were thinking about, to really challenge everything. Also because some documents were also missing. For example, Robert Kallio himself tells us that there was like a yellow paper proposal that he says that it was before the web that he wrote that was not there anymore. And he was challenged because he really wanted to find this to show to people that actually there were also other projects at CERN that were taking place regarding hypertext project. And then there was also other people who contributed to the archive, but in a limited sphere. And then there was also missing people. For example, Tim Berners-Lee, who is regarded as the founding fathers of the web, is not there in terms of documents. So he never brought documents to the archive. And Robert Kallio said that he was such a messy guy and he didn't really want to preserve anything. So maybe documents that were developed and written by Tim Berners-Lee are not there, or maybe they are missed. And so, and also some people who worked in the web project has private archives. So we tried to contact these people, but actually it was not possible to access their private archives. Someone is like very jealous regarding this. And there was also some dispute that was like, that there was among people. So even these missing materials was showing like complex issues that were there among people, but also regarding the memory surrounding the web. So for us, before doing the historical research and before writing my PhD thesis, it was very useful to really understand who preserved these historical materials, who donated it, who is missing, what was lost and what cannot be seen. Even for me to have like in my mind the limits that my own research has. And then if we go inside the archival material itself, I wanted to provide you with just a few examples. So the first one is this proposal. So here you can see the very first proposal of this project. And I don't want to call it the first web proposal, because if you look at this document, at the very center of the page, it is written a proposal X. So the web was not there. But actually what happened is that in the public memory of the web, this proposal is very like the ultimate material that's really connected to the creation of the web. In a case, it's like this, but we should pay attention because actually what we understood is that in the archive, there were 3 proposals. The first one is this with proposal X. The second was also written by Tim Berners-Lee, but in 1990. And at the center, there was not a proposal X anymore, but there was MESH. So MESH was the name that Berners-Lee thought about this project at the beginning. But actually what happened when we interviewed people, for example, François Pelluquige, he said that actually the two proposals that were written by Berners-Lee, they were not comprehensible. People could not understand it. So basically, there was the need for a third proposal, who was written with the support of Robert Cailliot. And only in this third proposal, the word World Wide Web was there. So actually, traditional narratives portray the document of these slides as the origin of the web, but the story is not just so simplistic. There was some kind of negotiation also regarding the names of the project, because actually during our research, we also noticed that the name of the project itself was one of the elements that could really attract the attention of the CERN management staff. So here, just a document that is narrated as some kind of mythological, you really need to go deep into the archive to understand. Okay, and I think I came to 15 minutes, but actually here just something that we found also in the archive. So there was a contested memory of the web, not just right now, but even in the 90s, because we saw that the media was portraying the web as the internet. And inside the CERN archive, we also find out that there was documents that were documented the fight of Robert Cailliot to fight this wrong memory. Okay, so maybe we can speak about this during the discussion. And then just 3 takeaways, so but we can discuss it during our questions time. So like for us, as I said, it was very important to construct the biography of the archive to really understand the history and the figures behind it, and also read what was not there. So really pay attention to who was absent and what was like minor to really understand the story. So thank you so much. I'm sorry if I have more minutes to speak about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. You know that in ICA, we are very strict. Okay, thank you very much. Great research. I participated in the final conference of that research in Switzerland, in the CERN. It was a great experience to get in contact with that research, with the real archives, a great group of people. Okay, now it's time for the presentation of Ángeles Donoso Macaya. She's an immigrant educator, researcher, and activist from Santiago, from Chile, and she's based in New York City. She's professor at the City University of New York. Her teaching interests span Latin American and Caribbean photography, theory and history, human rights, activism, and counter-archival production during the Latin American Cold War. She also has made research about documentary film, transfeminism, memory studies, military research, and environmental humanities. She is the author of a very, very famous popular book. It has been published in Spanish, La insubordinación de la fotografía in 22, and the English edition has 2 English editions, The Insubordination of Photography. So thank you, Ángeles, for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you, Susana and Jerónimo, for the invitation. Deborah, that was fantastic. Let me share my screen. Okay, now you are seeing this, right? Let me put it on presentation mode. 1 second. Okay. So I'm gonna talk for a few minutes about an ongoing project that I started a few years ago. This larger project I'm calling the visual infrastructure of agrarian reform in Chile. And I'm gonna also say a few words about why this long temporal arc. Normally, the agrarian reform period in Chile is considered from either 1962 or 1964 up to 1973, when the coup, interrupted the process, dismantled the whole process, and the dictatorship started a process that it's called the counter-reform, where they basically dismantled all of the advances that both first the Christian Democrats and then the Popular Unity government had, reached. So as Carlos was saying, my work really sits at the intersection of several fields. I consider myself a memory studies scholar, visual studies scholar. I am here also engaging with rural history of Chile, with women and gender studies and political ecology mainly. And this exploration is in dialogue also with the kind of infrastructural and environmental turn in the humanities. So what are you seeing now? And I am this seminar is very important because I do consider, of course, images as material objects. We tend to think of images as surfaces, right? But these surfaces have depth, and they're objects also that exist in the world. I am considering what I call the visual infrastructure. And understanding visuality in a rather expansive way. So I mean by visuality, I mean both the visual infrastructure that was built and that enabled actually the implementation of agrarian reform in the 1960s. As we will see, visuality was instrumental for the transformation of the countryside in Chile. And also the visual economy, and that is a very important term by Deborah Poole, the visual economy that agrarian reform basically set in motion, right? Because in order for the government to promote and inform about agrarian reform, they needed to rely on images and on different kinds of media. So also I consider agrarian reform not only as a social and economic project, but also as a cultural project that has ramifications, and reverberates to the present. So what I argue is that this visual economy continue operating to this day. So what you're seeing here are two, and I'm understanding visuality in binary terms, basically like from above, and from below. So what you have on your right side or left side, I don't know how on the left side, the black and white image, it's one of the first documents that I'm working with. This is it's a project that it's called the OAS, the Organization of American States and Chile Aerial Photogrammetric Survey. This was done in May 1961. And it's available at the Natural Resources Information Center Digital Archive. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this document in a moment. And then when you see on the other side of your screen, it's an illustration that it's the base for a poster designed by Marcia Miranda for ANAMURI. ANAMURI is the Asociación Nacional de Mujeres Rurales e Indígenas, so the National Association of Rural and Indigenous Women in Chile, which was founded in 1998, so already in the transition period. It is active to this day. They're part of CLOC and La Vía Campesina. And for several decades, they have been doing activist work, demanding for better working conditions for rural women across the country, denouncing the use of pesticides, but also promoting and demanding for an integral agrarian reform, right? One that centers national food sovereignty, land rights for women. So basically, it's like, since the agrarian reform process was interrupted, they say that it was incomplete, and in this kind of like bringing to the present, it can be transformed also into something else. So I'm really interested also in how Marcia uses different kinds of media into creating these collages, right? So it's like the same way that we would say like man and nature are interconnected, right? In the same way that these different kind of images, not only photographs, but also illustrations, hand drawings, they're also kind of they're building this image of a woman emerging out of the of nature, and also with all of these different threats that basically attack her body. So of course, ANAMURI has a very kind of like a fundamental ecofeminist underpinning, a philosophy in their work. So that is the frame from like early 1960s to 2020s. So here a different view. So what I'm arguing is that we tend to think of agrarian reform as, at least in Chile, in the collective memory, it's like, oh, it's this process that was very radical, and where peasants gained rights, and it was the land for those who work it. But actually agrarian reform, and this is well known by historians, of course, was implemented in at the thrust of the Cold War. And the first agrarian reform that was implemented in Chile, the first law was actually promulgated under the right-wing government of Alessandri in 1962. And then the agrarian reform received a lot of support from the Alliance for Progress throughout the 60s with the under the Christian Democratic government of Eduardo Frei Montalva. And this was a reform to actually stop, the impulse that was coming from the countryside. So to prevent the real, quote unquote, agrarian reform, the socialist agrarian reform. So, and I argue that this Proyecto Aerofotogramético was instrumental for this because in 1961, there was a mega earthquake in Chile. So this also, we see how nature, like the elements actually are also are important part of this history. So there was a mega earthquake, and just to give you a few ideas, the extent of this earthquake in the scale of Richter in measure 9.5, it has been the most powerful earthquake on the planet ever recorded in human history. The force was such that it modified the course of several rivers in Los Lagos region in the south, sank Valdivia, the city, almost by 3 meters, and caused significant damages in several regions, Biobío, Maule, Libertador Bernardo Higgins, Metropolitan, which is the rural area of Chile, right? So 2 months between January and February 1961, this is 2 months before the failed U.S. Navy CIA invasion of Playa Girón, aka Bay of Pigs, in April 1961, the Organization of American States and the Inter-American Development Bank commissioned the Hunting Service Corporation Limited, this is a Canadian company founded in 1956, to conduct this aerial photogrammetric survey of central and southern Chile to measure the extent of the damage, right, of infrastructural damage, of property damage. But this instrument, this visual instrument, was instrumental, because let me show you. Sorry, I didn't want to change actually to the previous one. So what you're seeing in the left is scale 1 to 20,000. It measure all the lands in the south of Chile. And what you get here is like a very kind of like abstracted view, right? Like a distance view, a calculated view. We could say like this, how the state sees, as James Scott would say. But of course, these images don't suggest nothing of the material loss of the thousands of lives that were lost. But this photogrammetric survey, that surveyed like meter by meter all the land in the south, was used then by the Agrarian Corporation reform to actually measure the states, that they could actually expropriate. So an instrument that was developed to kind of like survey the land and the loss of infrastructure was a few years later used to see the extent of the latifundia in the south of Chile. So this photogrammetric project was instrumental for the state to implement agrarian reform. So because this detailed record allowed Cora to calculate the total extension of arable lands. In these maps, you have like the detailed names of all the rivers, like you can actually see the divisions between states. It's very, very detailed. Today, we're very used to see, aerial footage and drones, but this was manually actually mounted. It's a very beautiful document. So this is how then this becomes this view, right, of the Chilean field. So basically what agrarian reform does in the 1960s is that it transforms land into usable land, into exploitable land. And what I'm arguing, and this in dialogue with many feminist historians who have also worked on this period, also, women became exploitable bodies for the agrarian reform. And that is what actually Ana Muri makes visible in their posters, right? Like you can see the continuation. I'm trying to suggest here like a visual continuity between this kind of like aerial view, the development of the land and the asentamientos, the settlements that the state, Chilean state developed so peasants could live in the country. But of course, to live there, you had to be a married family. Only men got property. So it was also very, of course, like a very heteropatriarchal, design of the countryside. And then you have Ana Muri's vision, who actually tells you that this regime in the 80s and the 90s is basically transforming both crops and bodies into waste, right? And it's kind of like in a very eloquent illustrations that you can see there. These are the original illustrations designed by Marcia, and then how like, the actual posters that Ana Muri does for different campaigns. So for instance, Luna, which is the illustration that I showed before, has been used, this was used for the International Women's Day and violence against women in 2013. And then the poster to the right was used in what Ana Muri calls their tribunales éticos. So they do these ethical courts, kind of like a popular justice initiatives to basically demand, accountability. This was, so all of this research emerges out of my previous book that, as Carlos was mentioning, The Insubordination of Photography, where I explored what I call the expanding photographic field in Chile during the dictatorship, how the civil society, how regular people use photography and different media, right? Like different forms of photographs to make disappearance visible on the streets, on the public space. And what I realize now is how centered I was as a researcher on what was happening on the cities, right? Because now I'm reconsidering this history, and agrarian reform might be the most important central event in kind of like recent Chilean history. Kind of propelled the coup, that has an effect, the dictatorship. So instead of making 1973 kind of like a temporal cut, it's like I'm thinking, no, we really need to explore the long 60s, right? That many recent scholars have not made. So even though I was paying a lot of attention to what was happening in the city, really the heart of my book is this case, the Lonquen case, which is like, it was the first time that they found in the late 70s, they found an illegal burial inside an abandoned mine. So I spent several years working with this case, not having access to the actual criminal file that only became available in 2018 when I was doing the revisions of my book. So I included all of that. But for maybe 8 years, I was working only with how media had been reporting on this finding, right? This horrible finding. And then years later, I found this photo because of the 15 people that were found in this cemetery, in this illegal burial, sorry, not cemetery. In Spanish, we call it cementerio clandestino, like a clandestine grave. 11 were peasants from the same fundo, right? And what I heard and what I read is like, oh, they were very active in the agrarian reform, and that's why the owner, like basically didn't like them, and so they asked basically the cops to kill them. So I spent, years working with this archive of death, as Saidiya Hartman called the archive, right? Like with like the first time that the person brought me this chart, like this carrito cart with the sign Derechos Humanos and all of this evidence, it's like kind of like the evidence of the world of the. It was like a very emotional moment for me. I was not expecting I was going to find, I'm not showing you the photos of the actual evidence, but just seeing, these pieces of organic matter, of sweaters. And so I was like, how could you historicize this history, but when they were living, right? Like when they were alive. And so, and then I realized, like the peasants themselves, have been throughout the dictatorship, besides, kind of denouncing the disappearances. So what you see on the left is a book that actually I work with on my book, Donde Están. But then they were making sure that the memory of the agrarian reform was alive also on the public space, right? So they did many things throughout the 80s. One of the things is they did an event in 1984, and the visual resemblances between these two documents are striking, right? It's like so that was una pista, digamos, one cue that I have. But then also in 2017. When they were, like for the 50 years of the promulgation of agrarian reform, there were a lot of commemoration activities. Like CORA and INDAP. INDAP is the National Institute for Agricultural Development, released a series of documentaries online. There were book publications, events. And in one of these events, a very important rural historian, Jose Bengoa, who just passed away a few months ago. And he has written so much about agrarian reform. Yeah, okay, 50 minutes. Excellent. With this, I finish. He said that the memory of agrarian reform was completely petrified, right? Like nobody, like whenever people gather to talk about agrarian reform, there's never young people. It's always old people with their memories. You know, it's like, it was like this, it was like that. So it's like, and he says it's petrified. So I was like, how can you unpetrify this memory? And my 2 cents is like going back to this visual archive, right? So just with this I finish. So this is just to give you an idea of this massive collection of documents that I'm working with from the 60s to now. These are institutional archives, private collections, there are all kinds of materials. And so little by little, I am kind of like trying to write a visual history that engages, or that it's interesting also for the younger generation, right? Like people who were born like me in the 80s or in the 90s, who know nothing about this fascinating process that really changed the course of Chilean recent history. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angeles. When you were talking about these aerial photographies, I was thinking in some projects by Forensic Architecture. They did projects in the south of Colombia, contemporary projects, to see how the original communities, they're moving because of the pressure of the new settlements and new companies destroying the forest.
I actually collaborated with them too in a project in Chile about tear gas on 2019. Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you for that observation.
And also, you know, there are many projects and yes, proposals, artistic proposals also in Argentina about the desaparecidos, how to represent the desaparecidos in photography. We can discuss about this later. So our next and last speaker, Annie Rudd, she's Associate Professor of Critical Media Studies at the University of Calgary in Canada. She's a historian of photography and media historian. She's the author of a forthcoming book next year, Candid, A History of Unposed Photography, by Yale University Press, 2027. Her research has been published in different journals, including Photography and Culture, Photographies, Information and Culture. So, Annie, welcome to the seminar. The digital floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So thanks so much to the organizers for assembling this panel, which I'm really honored to speak on. And thank you to Deborah and to Angeles for those really illuminating presentations. I'm fascinated by your research, both of you. So I'm going to talk today about one element of my research, which is going to appear in significantly expanded form as a chapter in my forthcoming book, Candid, A History of Unposed Photography. In this book, I trace the historical development in the United States of a widely held but under-examined assumption about photography, that photographers can more fully reveal the people that they photograph when they do so surreptitiously with hidden cameras, thereby divesting subjects of the ability to pose and even to consent to being photographed. This is an idea that has materialized in a number of different contexts since the late 19th century. In fact, it's probably an idea that we're familiar with today as well. But in my talk today, I want to discuss it in relation to American photography in the 1930s and to focus on a particular project by the American photographer Walker Evans, photographs that he made covertly on the New York subway system, and sort of expand outward from there. Now, when I received the invitation to participate in this seminar, I wanted to discuss this case study because I think it's an instance where I started off doing archival research without much of a clear angle, without much of a sense of what I hoped to sort of find that would be novel or that would expand existing research on this topic. And I gradually sort of came to develop an angle by way of witnessing disagreement and contradiction within the archival materials that I was engaging with, and sort of embracing these tensions as a generative and useful presence in my research. So I'm going to just start by talking about the photographs themselves. In 1938, the same year that his Museum of Modern Art exhibition and photo book, both titled American Photographs, would establish him as perhaps the most prominent photographer in America, in the United States, Walker Evans embarked on an experiment in invisibility. Descending into the New York subway system with a 35mm Contax camera concealed in his overcoat and a cable release threaded through his sleeve, Evans photographed commuters unawares. The photographs that resulted from this experiment, which Evans resumed in 1941, would eventually be published as a book titled Many Are Called and exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, as well as published in the magazine Harper's Bazaar. Here are some representative images, and I'll show more in a moment. But as even these very brief details that I've just offered suggests, Evans' subway portraits, as they came to be called, operated primarily within the discursive spaces of fine art photography, being shown in museums and galleries, being discussed by curators and art critics. But in my archival research, I came to espouse a somewhat different perspective, one that was rooted in my engagement with what struck me as some important tensions and contradictions around the separation of the artist photographer from his broader visual cultural context, and around the tendency to accept and naturalize what I've come to call the photographer side perspective. And this is something that I sort of develop more in my book, but essentially refers to sort of like the acceptance and naturalization of photographers' own accounts of what a photograph contains and who authors a photograph, without much attention to sort of who is on the other side of the frame. In the spirit of sort of questioning those orthodoxies, I'm going to talk today about some of the ways that Evans' photographs were in dialogue with the mass visual culture of his moment, and especially with the popular trope of the candid camera, which had emerged less than a decade earlier and had swiftly become a visual culture cliche. Now, attending to this interchange between Evans and his mass culture sort of context is valuable, I think, because it complicates a common but limiting individualist framework that has historically been applied to certain photographers as part of a tendency to treat Evans as an autonomous auteur, purely generative in his aesthetic vision. I want to instead consider the ways in which he was in conversation with and symptomatic of his cultural surround. What I found in my research is that adopting this sort of an expanded frame also allows us to carve out a longer history for certain broader looking practices. In the case of Evans' photography, I want to place it in the context of the phenomenon of masculinized voyeurism or the male gaze, which came to be sort of more widely discussed and naturalized in the second half of the 20th century. But first, I want to talk more directly about Evans' photographs. The subway portraits show a broad range of New Yorkers embodying a broad range of attitudes and expressions. Some appear lost in thought or psychically preoccupied, while others seem to be vigilantly surveying their surroundings or steeling themselves against the public gaze. This tends to be a more commonly adopted disposition among the women that he photographed, which is probably unsurprising. And a smaller number of others appear to register Evans' camera, and what those photographs reveal is their reaction to its presence. But certain aesthetic features are consistent, reflecting the technical conditions under which the photographs were made. Shot blind across the subway aisle at uniform distance, subjects' faces are illuminated by the subway's incandescent light, and at times are blurred or imprecisely framed owing to the train's movements and also to Evans' inability to see or control exactly what the lens was registering. Evans would later describe these photographs in terms that emphasize the revelatory power of their surreptitious approach and the sort of power of the subway as a space where people's expressions were centered and were kind of unmasked. He said they offered what he called true portraiture or the nearest approach thereof. In saying this, Evans was reiterating what was, by the 1930s, a common justification for the candid camera. Concealing the camera, the logic went, was a way to unmask subjects, divesting them of the deceptive poses that they would otherwise offer before the camera. In writings and interviews, often Evans characterized what he described as a falseness of posed portraiture, in which people constructed and an appealing facade for the camera. In his 1936 photograph, Penny Picture Display Savannah, Evans reflexively foregrounded the posed studio portrait, presenting it as a kind of homogenizing force that was capable only of producing an illusorily pleasant rendering of its subject. The subway photographs were intended as a counterpoint. In a 1962 feature in Harper's Bazaar, where his photographs first met a wide audience, his subway photographs, Evans authored a painstakingly wrought text. And when you visit the archive, you see the number of sort of labored, inadequate drafts that went into producing this written piece. He described the subway as the dream location for any portrait photographer weary of the studio and the horrors of vanity. He situated the truthfulness of his subway portraits in their capacity to undermine the facades that people would assume if they knew that they were being photographed. So, as he wrote, the guard is down and the mask is off. People's faces are in naked repose down in the subway. So Evans is arguing here, or suggesting, that open interactions between photographers and subjects of the sort that occurred in portrait studios were likely to satisfy sitters' vanity, but deceptively conceal their quote-unquote real selves. But as I did this research, I became interested in what the claim of vanity helped to justify, and also what this claim might have obscured or concealed from view. And what I ultimately ended up arguing is that the disavowal of quote-unquote vanity and the aim of undermining it provided a pretext for Evans' project that helped to justify, the invasion of his subject's privacy. He called himself an apologetic voyeur, and he excused this intrusion, this voyeurism, by presenting it as a necessary means of getting to photographic truth. But the ways that Evans characterized his attachment to this project at other moments complicates this framing, this idea that this is sort of an ennobling quest for truth, suggesting that there was a certain compulsion in his work. It was something that I became sort of hooked on doing. He went crazy with, he said, and he had to make himself stop, as well as a kind of compulsive propensity to pursue and collect photographic subjects as if they were irresistible objects of desire that he had, fallen in love with, and he could not stop collecting. Critical and curatorial writings on Evans' subway portraits have tended to treat this project as a marker of its creator's originality. And I think, for example, when the very influential curator, John Sarkowski, wrote that Evans' giving up of authorial control with this series produced what he called a kind of virtuoso piece. And, I think it's worth sort of teasing out the implications of this sort of language, which frames the sort of disavowal of authorial control in terms that connote artistic mastery and skill. Such evaluations show a paradoxical propensity to read Evans' rejection of authorship as itself evidencing his unique authorial hand. But I'm interested in thinking through the ways that these discipline-specific narratives can be expanded or complicated if we unlearn some of their guiding assumptions. In writings on Walker Evans, he's often celebrated as an artist who brought vernacular imagery into his work. But that vernacular imagery, the visual residue of sort of mass or folk cultures, is never really framed as an influence on him. He instead, Evans, gets framed as the one who sort of invests this visual detritus with aesthetic significance. So I became interested in thinking about how Evans might actually be symptomatic of this imagery and influenced by it rather than operating as a purely generative originator. So I want to argue that Evans' subway photographs invite an alternate reading, one that treats Evans' relationship with mass culture imagery as one of reciprocity and even masculinist camaraderie. Evans shared with the popular photographic culture of his time a suspicion toward apparent facades, an eagerness to undermine the quote-unquote vanity that motivated them, and a belief that voyeurism, when practiced by a spectator with the right tools and the right intentions, could function as a panacea for these problems. In both Evans' photography and the popular visual culture of his moment, the photographer's unabrogated right to photograph is taken as a given, and the poses that surreptitious photography undermines are dismissed as deceptive facades. Yet this framing belies the degree to which the pursuit of visual pleasure motivates the work of surreptitious photography. So, a year before Evans first ventured into the subway with his contacts, mass photographic culture was given a prominent new mouthpiece with the publication of the debut issue of Popular Photography. Launched in 1937, it soon became the highest circulation photography magazine in the United States. In its debut issue, references to Evans were absent, but references to the candid camera were everywhere. This reflected considerable creep in the use of the term candid camera, since it had been coined in 1929 in relation to the work of the photojournalist Eric Zolliman, and had subsequently become a commonplace of the illustrated magazines, as well as a camera marketing term. In Popular Photography's first issue, the cover copy promised candid shots, and the cover photo mimicked one, depicting a young white woman toweling off in a shower. The model's gaze is diverted from the camera, suggesting an unawareness of its presence and giving the spectator the impression they are unseen. But the grin on her face encourages the spectator to regard this unbidden exposure as a pleasure, a lighthearted peek rather than a real transgression. The letter from the editor appealed to the reader's desire to peek further behind the shower curtain, providing behind-the-scenes details about preparations for the cover shoot and excusing this surreptitious peek as a permissible one by insinuating that the model was enjoying herself. This image and the editor's discussion of it introduced a dynamic governing the candid camera that became pervasive in the photographic press of this period. In it, masculinized voyeurism was both invited by the candid camera and then quickly excused with a wink and a smile, or justified as necessary after the fact. This rhetorical gesture foregrounded the candid camera's revelations while at the same time sidestepping any serious critique of its intrusiveness or the gendered nature of its deployment. A feature photo in the issue titled "How Would You Take Her?" embodied this approach. In addition to this spread characterizing its model as a sexual conquest, this double entendre referred to the diverse and sometimes violent ways that photographers working in different genres might choose to depict her. The spread included a shot of its model at the candid camera's mercy, applying makeup as she gazed at her appearance in a hand mirror. The model's seeming absorption in her own reflected likeness, the narcissistic looking relation at the center of the photograph, becomes a pretext for the candid camera's operation, allowing her attention to be directed away from the photographer so that he can capture her in what looks like an unposed portrait. The model's apparent vanity permits the candid camera's operations at both a practical and a moral level. Her self-regarding gaze leaves her vulnerable to the camera's capture, and it also serves as a basis for an implicit moral judgment. The vanity she displays as she admires her own reflection renders her deserving of capture in a state of behind-the-scenes dishevelment before she has perfected her appearance to meet the public eye. So vanity becomes both the object of criticism and the excuse for furtive looking. Such imagery, purporting to expose what was concealed from public visibility, became ubiquitous in the mass visual culture of the mid to late 1930s, and it was often presented through a lexicon of humor that shielded it from serious critique. The growing prominence of this gaze in mass media can, I think, be understood as what Jonathan Metzl has called popular voyeurism, a shift toward the embrace of what was once a pathologized looking relation as a normative and even dominant one. With this shift, popular depictions aligned pleasurably surreptitious looking with a clear-cut gender binary in which men looked and women appeared. The candid camera was often framed in the press not only as a masculinized tool, but also as a means for spectators to accrue pleasure through disrobing or uncovering the objects of their gaze. But what remained veiled and therefore naturalized among these processes was the motivation that guided the spectatorial position, and especially the visual pleasure that spectators were meant to accrue from this unequal gaze relationship. Turning back to Evans' subway photographs with this additional context in mind, it becomes possible to critique the claim of a true portraiture that is premised on unmasking subjects through subterfuge while remaining invisible behind the camera. This is a truth, after all, that is determined on the photographer's side, foreclosing the ability of subjects' willful participation in the process. It's also a truth whose pursuit justifies a drive to objectify and to collect, something that we, I think, see playing out in images like this unpublished maquette that Evans produced of his subway photographs, where we see a collection of women most unaware of the camera's presence and sort of unable to construct a response to it. Critiquing this model of photographic truth through surreptitious capture also permits us to rethink what posing for the camera might mean. Regarded in the light of the popular visual culture of the 1930s, I think it becomes possible to reconceive of the pose as a form of armature against an increasingly thoroughgoing form of compelled visibility, a means for subjects to embrace themselves against objectifying gazes instead of yielding to them. This context also means a resituating of the candid camera's claims to peel back subjects' deceptive facades. Such claims, as we have seen, frequently serve to justify baser kinds of denuding. To counter the voyeuristic tendencies that characterize candid photography, demands rethinking the principle of revelation on which candid photography has traditionally been premised, in which the candid camera captures a fundamental but hidden inner truth that would otherwise go unseen, over which the photographic subject has no ability to exert control. I'm on the last page, thank you. In closing, let us consider this photograph of a woman who looks directly at Evan's camera with a self-possessed expression. She's one of a relatively small number of passengers photographed by Evans, who faces the camera openly, bearing a gaze and an expression that demonstrate clear awareness of its presence. The shot frames her squarely in the center. Against the wide-brimmed hat she wears and her pulled-back hair, her face stands out sharply. This woman's gaze challenges Evan's status as an invisible author, rendering him present within the scene by addressing him visually. The photograph that results offers not a furtive peek at its subject's interiority, but rather an imprint of the impact that Evan's camera has had on the scene he depicts and on the subject whose truth he purports to reveal. Last slide, I promise. Looking at the negative from which Evans cropped this image yields a slightly different picture, one whose oppositional intensity shared between two women who Evans photographed repeatedly was not the truth that he sought. Undermining the project of transparent revelation, these women instead present Evans' camera with a kind of opacity, a refusal to cede themselves to a voyeuristic gaze and to be reduced to the forms of truth that the candid photographer purports to uncover through subterfuge. The faces that present themselves to the camera are revealing enough. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Okay. We have about half an hour for questions. So I have individual question, general question, but I would like to open the microphone or the chat to the people who is participating online, if they have any specific question or general questions. Also, Susana is checking YouTube. If we have no questions, maybe I can ask you a general one or a specific one. Okay, well, I have
Linda.
a question for, oh, sorry?
No, Linda.
Okay, Linda, yes. Sorry, I didn't see the hand. Okay, Linda.
Yeah, I found all three papers really interesting. I have just a comment for Annie. I wonder if you'd like to comment on this, which is that magazines like Popular Photography, in claiming to teach people how to take candid photographs, were actually producing a very constructed photograph. So those articles in Popular Photography that told people, well, keep telling people to smile and keep taking photographs until they do smile in the way that you want them to smile. I think it kind of aligns with some of the points that you're making.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. So you're absolutely right. There is a kind of tradition in photographic publications, even extending back into the late 19th century, of encouraging photographers to attempt to sort of construct seemingly natural moments. And I actually sort of situate the origins of this idea of candid photography in like the late 19th century photographic trade press, where we have all this advice to studio photographers that seems to be reflective of the presence of like snapshot photographers and Kodak cameras in public spaces, and that says, you want the naturalness of a snapshot, but you want to produce sort of a better quality and more controlled image than snapshot photographers can. So there's like an interest in channeling this idea of naturalness that people were becoming to associate with snapshot photography, but then harnessing it in a very particular way that would still reflect sort of like the judgment and skill of the photographer. So I think you're absolutely right that this, like, the claim of naturalness sort of from the outset of candid photography, as I see it, was always something sort of constructed and staged in specific ways. So thank you so much for that comment.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? I have a question for Deborah. Thanks to the CERN, the web is an open access, open source, public digital environment. because it was born in the CERN. The logic of the CERN is everything what's produced there is open access. Do you think it would be possible to do the same research if you want to analyze the origins of any other digital system like Facebook or Twitter or whatever? How do you imagine the future people trying to analyze the origins of Facebook? Because I think you have been lucky in the sense, okay, you have to wait 30 years to write to the archives, but I don't know. What do you think about that in the future? The challenges that you will have.
Yeah. So thanks, Carlos. This is such a good question. Also because I need to think about this for my future, because it's been a postdoc, I need to think about future research regarding this. But actually, maybe speaking in terms of Facebook, I think this will be more complicated because of the nature and the policy of the organization. Because as you said, like CERN is not like a private organization, so it's an international organization, and so the mission is to provide humanity with I don't know, with like knowledge and experiences. So I think that also in that case, like when Gabriele asked for the permission to go into the archive and access those archives, the request of CERN is that you can access the archive if there is an academic interested behind it. So if you can show that what you are looking for and what you are researching can provide a value to humanity. But speaking about Facebook, I'm sure it could be like more challenging because it's a private organization, and even I think people could be like more compelling to approach. But the fact is that maybe we can also look at Facebook or other platforms, not just from the organizational perspective, but also from what was like collecting during the day. So I'm thinking about like media, newspaper, magazine, also comments from users, because actually the history is not just from the organization point of view, but it could also be collected from the users and point of view. And in the case of the web, this was a part of the research that we should have done. But by the end of the day, there was so much document inside the organization that we decided to focus just on the document of the organization. But actually, something is missing so far as for the web project. So I think that also for other technologies, we could also think about other kind of sources. So also digital, or maybe you can also think about Facebook and go to the Wayback Machine and try to understand the history of platforms, only looking at the design of the platform. So it really depends on the angle of the project and the research that you would like to approach. But yes, I think that we should be very creative in terms of accessing archival materials, and especially with those organizations that could be like very restrictive. And yeah, so, and also because it's an organization that it's in the United States, so maybe I should look at the policy of United States, and maybe if you can see something, we could access something about this. But it could be so interesting to study history of other platform and similar medium.
Yes, maybe the people who left Facebook, they have a lot of information about the origins. Well, do we have more questions from the people here? Yes, Edith Ibarra. Go ahead, adelante.
Bueno, disculpen, no voy a hablar en español, pero le quiero comentar a Ángeles que me conmovió su intervención. Creo que como países compartimos, ¿no? Digo, ahorita lo que te quiero preguntar o comentar lo puedes decir en inglés, pero lo que quería preguntarte era, cuando veo el carrito, los legajos, ¿no? Justamente a lo largo del seminario hemos estado comentando cómo el archivo tiene la pulsión, ¿no? De que no sea olvido, sino que justamente, ¿no? O sea, y pienso en toda esta gente asesinada, desaparecida, que nosotros como investigadores disputamos por su espacio y su lugar en la vida, ¿no? Entonces me gustaría que comentaras cuando tienes este contacto con los legajos, ¿no? Con las imágenes, con la ropa, o sea, ¿qué te explota en la cabeza como investigadora y como ciudadana? Porque como que eso no lo podemos desvincular.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I respond in English, right? Better. Um, uh, as I said, it was a very emotional experience. This case in Chile is emblematic. I mean, but Lonquén was not the only one. Right after these remnants of people were found. Many other clandestine cemeteries started to emerge. And part of this was because of the effort of the Vicariate of Solidarity and just like regular people, finding graves. For instance, I personally, I never met the family, Purísima, who is the widow of Sergio Maureira. And this is a case that has been widely studied, but I was just like committed to study the media coverage of this, right? Of this finding, because it was of course it produced a plethora of different media coverage. Of course, most of the media wanted to kind of debunk that this was completely fake, that the bones were not real. I mean, it was insane. And then, of course, there was some media that were trying to fix the evidence, right? And photography became instrumental for this. But the interesting thing is that photos could not be shown on media, right? Like they couldn't actually show the photos of the bones themselves. So they just keep showing this kind of like black mouth, of the mine. So I mean, in the book, I talk about this collective trauma, right? Like these things that cannot be represented, that because photography always arrives late to the event of disappearance, right? You cannot photograph disappearance itself. So you have to imagine, you have to represent it. But then, so imagine like working on this for 8 years. And then because transitional justice also works like this, the case was actually closed in 2018, 40 years after the findings. I mean, the case had been open and shut many times, and the responsible for the crimes were actually prosecuted. I mean, the main character, the main El Policía, who was actually the intellectual author, had died before. He had already been prosecuted. So it's basically when the case closes, the archives opens, right? So, and you would think that because of a case closed, it's like, okay, now everything is closed. But when the moment the archives opens, other narratives emerge, right? And even though we do have, as citizens of Chile, you have access to this public access to this archive, it was not easy to actually access the criminal files. I could only access it because I knew a judge and a friend, like how it works. So it's like someone connected me to someone. So, but I had no idea what I was gonna see. And when this card with all of these files arrived, I spent 3 days at that archive just looking and crying, while I was looking at all of these materials. And also that I knew that I was perhaps the first, I think I was the second person who saw this, who was not an expert. I was not a lawyer. I was not, just a regular citizen. And I was like, what is my right to see this also? It's like, what does it mean that I have access to this, to see these photos, this violence? So I wrote a long essay that I didn't publish in the book. It was kind of like a process in itself, to work with this. But for me, the commitment was like, I do not want to keep writing histories of death. It's like, how can you honor the memories of these peasants, of all the peasants who were killed? Like the repression in the countryside was massive. Like only in the first few weeks after the coup, hundreds of peasants were killed just because that they have been active in the agrarian reform process. So it was really a conflict in the countryside. That's how I'm seeing it now. And because of that commitment, like this effort to kind of like write the long history of the struggle for the land in Chile, but from this visual archive. But yeah, because and I quoted Saidiya Hartman for a reason. It's like when you're trying to research, the human rights violations, the history of repression in your country, all that you're gonna find in the archive, it's death, you know, and it's the moment when the people disappeared, the moment when the people was killed, the moment, but each one of these persons has a memory, has a life, you know. So it's like, how can you honor that with, I mean, from my position as a researcher, as a writer? I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Thank you, Angeles. Do we have more questions? We have 10 more minutes. I have a general question for all of you. There are two questions in one, but the two questions are about artificial intelligence. So on one side, we are assisting now a reconstruction of the past with intervention of artificial intelligence. We do not only have fake news, we have fake historical documents. And that's one question, how to deal with that, specifically in your specific research field. And the other one is more positive. If you are using or you are thinking about using AI for processing photograph, old documents, whatever. So if AI can help you to improve your research. So we have a negative and a positive question. So I don't know who wants to start. It's a general question for any of you.
Maybe I can start, Carlos, because I have an experience like
Avanti, avanti.
Yeah. So last year with Gabriele, we submitted a new proposal to the SNF to study the history of artificial intelligence in Switzerland. And in this proposal, we have never mentioned using artificial intelligence for doing historical research. So at the end of the day, it turns out that, well, the proposal was rejected, so we didn't get the funding. But actually, one of the reviewers said that, well, actually, it is very strange that you want to study the history of artificial intelligence, but you don't want to use artificial intelligence. So basically, this was something that with Gabriele we discussed a lot, and for us it was like some kind of shocking, because yes, on the one side we can understand like the argumentation of this reviewer, but on the other hand, like I feel that like even if artificial intelligence can support the research of historians, maybe it's not necessary that in a project regarding the history of artificial intelligence, it must be there. But to be honest, we resubmitted the project again. And as there is some kind of this artificial intelligence hype during the day, we discussed with ITSIA, which is the Institute of Artificial Intelligence here at our university. And we decided that we would consider using some LLM tools for this kind of research if it was like funded. So in the new proposal, we mentioned to use artificial intelligence, but not like ChatGPT or Copilot. We will use a system of artificial intelligence that was like created inside the institute. And that could be like closed, because we fear that if we use ChatGPT or other systems that were developed outside of our university, outside of Switzerland as well, maybe you have like very sensitive document with a lot of private information, and we cannot like share this document that could contain also like private stuff with an organization that maybe today is here, and maybe these organizations say that it is not going to use the data, or maybe it is hide this information. So I think this is something that is very critical. But yes, personally, I believe that if we have tools that could support the research, we can use it. But I don't think that artificial intelligence should substitute the entire work of the historians. And also, if you use artificial intelligence, historians should be there to actually triangulate the sources. And then I have the discussion also with one person for the project of the web. And he kind of offered me to do like, to use these LLM tools to organize a tool for the timeline of some of the documents of CERN. And so in this regard, this tool would like portray a certain of timeline, and then a user can ask to the software to retrieve the document. So this tool is not going to tell you the answer that you try to ask, but if you have answer about the history of the web, it is going to retrieve like documents and you can read the documents. But the fact is that, as I mentioned, like the www collection is not digitized. And also, I'm sure that CERN doesn't want to put everything open access. So I'm not sure that we're going to do this. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah.
I can say something.
Angeles?
Yeah, to
Yeah.
give me time to talk to. Thank you, Deborah, for that. Well, first, in terms of like document falsification, all of that, I just want to stress that there have always been falsification of documents. Photography has been also manipulated since the early dawns of photography. So this idea that AI makes our job more difficult or easier, I think it comes with a grain of salt, right? Like, but at the same time that we have been promised this kind of panacea or these things that is going to solve all problems, that we all need to be basically dependent on AI to do everything, of course, I mean, I am not an expert on AI per se, and I really recommend Cecilia Recap's book, Theory of the Digital Dependency, that was published recently about this. But I can say that I have a strong political opinion against AI in research. And considering now that we live in a genocidal present where there are many real images that are being falsified, or saying that they're not truth when they are actually real images of a genocide, of destruction. So I think we need to be very worried in our work of how we embrace these technologies. There's also the environmental impact. I have never used ChatGPT in my life. I do use Google Translate because it's useful. But every time that people tell me like, oh, but you can use ChatGPT to do this or that, it's like, just consider the environmental impact of your game, So of course, AI can help us to, I don't know, doctors to make better surgeries, more precise things, but we do not use to we don't need to use AI for everything. And it's like, I think we're just like shooting ourselves in the foot every time that we do.
Annie, do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I mean, I share Angelis's strong suspicions of and sort of political resistance to Gen AI and large language models as these sort of tools that are being presented to us as the solutions to all of our problems and frictions. I feel strongly that that these tools are causing more problems than they are solving, and I really reject the narrative of inevitability that they are being presented to us with, especially in the academy, but elsewhere as well. I think the interest that is presented by promoters of these tools as the idea that they're going to offer us sort of smoothness and the absence of friction and sort of like comfort and ease. I'm profoundly troubled by that, and especially as a historian, I think like the frictions that they claim to resolve are exactly where sort of like a lot of the interest lies for us, and a lot of the capacity to expand the framework of what we know about the past. And I also think, we need to critique the sort of political economy of these tools and the industry that undergirds them, which has extraction as really a guiding premise. I was one of many authors who were invited to participate in a lawsuit against Anthropic because a text that I had written had been, taken without consent and basically used in a training model. And I think, that's just one small example, but these tools are predicated on exactly this kind of extraction. And so I have profound misgivings, and it's actually one of the things that bothers me most about the present moment. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ángeles mentioned Cecilia Recap's book. It's called Teoría de la Dependencia Digital. It's been published in Spanish also by Caja Negra. I don't know, Susana, tenemos algunas preguntas. Susana, do we have more questions? The microphone, el micro.
En YouTube no tenemos y
Okay,
creo que aquí tampoco. Bueno, yo quería aprovechar, igual puedo hacer una,
adelante,
sobre todo
adelante.
a Ángeles. Eh, bueno, me interesaron mucho todas las presentaciones. Creo que hay una conexión, ¿no? Que tiene que ver no solo con la imagen que trabaja Ani y Ángeles y todo este contexto social que rodea la imagen, sino la investigación que ahora nos toca hacer mucho a través de la web, ¿no? Y es muy interesante el trabajo que presentó Débora. Yo quería preguntar sobre este concepto que me interesó, si podrías abundar un poquito más, Ángeles, en esta construcción de la infraestructura visual, ¿no? Y que también tiene que ver con, me llama la atención cómo la imagen se vuelve un instrumento eh, visual, un instrumento de memoria y de conocimiento, pero que si lo ubicamos en el contexto que tiene que ver de las luchas, los movimientos sociales, eh, adquiere una fabricación distinta, un origen distinto la infraestructura visual. Me gustaría escuchar un poquito tu profundización en inglés, claro, para,
Sure.
eh, para seguir con el hilo, pero sí quería como profundizar en esa parte. Gracias.
Thank you for that question. So, yeah, basically, I am not using visual infrastructure metaphorically. So the development of this visual infrastructure goes part in part with the implementation, as I said, of a grant reform, but also of many other infrastructural advancements in throughout the 50s and 60s in Chile. It's like the modern estate expansion. So telecommunications expand, the telephone, highways. So it's like the democratic, Christian democratic state invested a lot, on basically expanding the state. And at the same time, they had to promote and inform the population about all of that they were doing, right? So this visual infrastructure also emerges in this moment. People who write about infrastructures, they underscore infrastructure's capacity to connect, right? It's like bridges, borders, they can connect or they can divide, they can facilitate the flow of information or people or goods, or they can stop it, right? There's also this kind of like common, ¿cómo se dice? Lugar común, cliché that infrastructures is what we don't see, like you don't realize all the time that you're actually crossing a bridge, but actually infrastructures fail all the time. So that claim that infrastructures are invisible, it's also kind of like very on the first world, vision of it, but because we know that infrastructures do not work the way that we want, or that they can be purpose to other means, right? So there's this idea that, and this comes also from Rosa Luxemburg, theorization of infrastructures as something that it's instrumental for the expansion of capital. So you need ports, you need bridges, et cetera, et cetera. So that is kind of like the emergence or development of this visual infrastructure in the 60s. But then in the dictatorship, what happens is like you don't have a state promoting, right, like this infrastructure anymore, because actually what the dictatorship does is like it dismantles a grand reform. So what I argue in other, piece that I wrote is like it changes operario, right? It's like now the infrastructure is not in the hands of the state, but it's like actually people who like they found magazines, bulletins, there was a human infrastructure as well in the dictatorship to actually disseminate these magazines, right? Like Boletín Tierra, who was the informative bulletin that the National Peasants Commission, who was this organization founded during the dictatorship, they had this magazine where they were inform about, like, I don't know, people are dying on the countryside because of pesticides. There's the new commemoration of grand reform. There's, the Pinochet is doing this, and they would transport these bulletins, through Chile with different unions. So it's like this whole kind of like how people organize themselves to actually inform others about what it was happening. So I am also defining this visually, and because visuality is material, right? It kind of like transmit ideas. And my first kind of approach to this was, as I said, because this exploration it ends in the present. In 2022, we had a referendum in Chile to change the constitution, right? So you could vote, I approve, to actually get rid of this horrible fucking constitution that was implemented during the dictatorship, or we reject this thing, right? And the campaign for the rechazo, embrace the countryside. It's like, if you don't wanna lose the countryside, you need to reject this thing, because the countryside is what is Chile, you know, this idea that plurinationality was not Chilean, and the countryside is very conservative in Chile. I've been having conversations with folks who do research in Peru and Colombia. It's a very different thing, because the most conservative vote in Chile is still the countryside, right? So, and the imagery that was kind of like disseminated in this context was so similar to the imagery that I was finding in the archive in 1960 to promote agrarian reform. So it's this idea that the countryside is Chilean, that, you know, the guaso and the campesino, but it's one campesino singular. It's not like el pueblo campesino. So all of these kind of like reverberations between what was happening in the 60s and what is happening in the present, right? The idea of family, of wealth, like all of this was taught via images with the alphabetization campaigns. So when you have like this kind of like broader perspective, because sometimes I do approach one image and I do a lot of ekphrasis, and it's the same kind of method that I developed in my book. You know, sometimes you need to kind of like take a kind of like a distance to see how our images circulating, being used, being reproduced, copied, and then you approach one image to see how one image can signify and kind of like convey different meanings.
Thank you, Angeles. For our non-American, nor Latin American people, we should say that in the early 60s, in that moment, most of the media and communication faculties were created in Latin America as a part of the development policies from the USA. Obviously, the big enemy was Cuba, so they had to propose an alternative. And media and communication, journalism studies, from Mexico to Argentina were created. The faculties, the university courses were created in that moment, the first generation of media and communication faculties. So, Susana, I think we are okay on time. If we have no more questions, thank you very, very much. Muchísimas gracias. Susana, the seminar will continue next year, next course?
Sí, el seminario continuará en 2027.
Okay.
We will do a pause now.
Yeah, necessary.
Yes. Y vamos a continuar el seminario. Esta es la última sesión en este año.
Okay, this is the last session.
We are preparing the book.
Yes, that's the idea. You're working on a book.
Okay. Yes, we started working on the preparation of book. Wait news about us. And then we continue, because this is so important. Continue discuss about memory in Mexico, in Argentina, wherever, and the construction of the materiality of different documents, memories. Así es que continuaremos, les tendremos noticias pronto, y agradecerles. Thank you very much. Desde la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana de la Unidad Xochimilco, desde donde organizamos este seminario, en esta ocasión y en todo el recorrido que hemos hecho con ICA, que estamos haciendo una relación para ampliar nuestras formas de construir una red, ¿no? de estudios sobre memoria internacional. Esa es la idea. Thank you very much, Deborah, Annie, Ángeles. and all people. Y una
Okay.
disculpa, Jerónimo tuvo
Yes, he sent me a WhatsApp.
una
He was
sesión, se le empalmó.
Okay, here we have a Catherine Montalbano. She's part of the ICA Communication History Division. You can see the link on the right, our LinkedIn group. So, well, I think I hope in the future we can continue this collaboration between the Communication History Division. Next year, the conference will be in Glasgow, ICA Glasgow, in June 27. The call for paper is normally the 1st of November, I guess. So if you want to send papers, if you want to propose panels, posters, whatever, pre-conferences about media and communication history, you are very welcome. And next year in Scotland could be a great place to drink whiskey and talk about materiality, archives, media and communication. So, gracias Susana, gracias Juan Xochimilco, and Deborah, Ángeles, Annie, Catherine, all the people who connected. So, thank you very much. Have a nice weekend.
Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a todos. Adiós.
Gracias.
Bye. Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego.
Ok, Susana.
¿Qué
Bueno,
tal?
salió bien.